Seth Williams is a third-year veterinary student at the University of Missouri College of Veterinary Medicine with the goal of becoming a small animal practitioner. His path to a career in veterinary medicine was somewhat unorthodox. He began his undergraduate career as both a music and biology major with the hopes of going to medical school. But after several twists and turns and honing his passions and interests, he received a Bachelor of Music degree from the University of Miami, where he studied music business and entertainment industries, marketing, and business administration. After a successful 4-year career in event production, Seth realized his long-term professional goals could all be fulfilled in a single career, veterinary medicine. For him, veterinary medicine provides the framework to simultaneously practice medicine, work with the animals he loves, build personal relationships, and make a lasting impact on the community. He especially hopes to uphold and strengthen the human-animal bond. Before moving to Columbia, Missouri, Seth married the love of his life, Becca, in August 2014. Becca is a social worker with the Columbia Public Schools and at an outpatient eating disorder treatment center, and also provides therapy and support for adolescent girls. Seth and Becca have 2 kids, Kane, a golden retriever, and Chase, a cockapoo. Seth also hosts his own podcast called Vet School Unleashed, where he discusses topics and issues related to life in veterinary school. Welcome to the podcast, Seth Williams. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Dr. K. It's great to be here.
So you are on break right now?
So yeah, we get about a week break during the holidays. The way that the hospital sets it up is every student can either get a week off for Christmas or a week off for New Year's. And usually we can preference those. We're kind of at the mercy of the way each service is scheduled. It just so happened that I get these few days off from the middle of last week until right after New Year's. So I've got a few days to take a breather and enjoy time here in the cold here in Columbia, Missouri.
So you're a third-year student, but it sounds like, are you doing some clinical rotations in the hospital?
Yeah. So Mizzou is, I think, a bit different and I think unique and special in this way, and that from what my understanding is that most veterinary schools, the way the curriculum is set up is that the first 3 years or the first 2.5 to 3 years are set up as didactic learning, learning in the classroom, lecture-based learning. And then the last year or year and a half is in the hospital. The way Mizzou sets it up is very much similar to the traditional medical school style. So we spend our first 2 years in didactics in the lecture hall, and then we move over to our veterinary health center. So we get a considerably more time in the hospital in the clinical side. Part of why I decided to go to Mizzou for that reason, just because I learn much better hands-on, as I'm sure most people do, and there they give us the opportunity to be in the hospital for almost 2 full years before we graduate.
That is really interesting, because I know, like what you were saying, that's how human medical schools typically do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I always figured, well, sure, they can start out earlier in the hospital because they don't have to learn about 8 different species,
right?
And study to pass boards on all those different species. So how on earth, I mean, you may not know the answer to this, but my question would be, how on earth do they pack all of that didactic learning into 2 years instead of 3?
Right. That's a good question. I guess they've just got a way of doing it. They've found a system that works. The other thing that I forgot to mention too is that, and again, I'm not exactly sure what every other veterinary school in the country does, but our summer break is much more truncated than I think most of them. We actually go until the very beginning of July, and we go back at the normal time in August. So we, instead of getting 3-ish months of break, we get a little around 2. So we go a little bit into the summer. So I guess that makes up for a bit of the time that we lose in that third year of didactic learning.
Okay. And you're not in the classroom at all as a third-year student?
Well, not anymore. No. So we have we're on a block schedule. So we have 8-week blocks in our didactic years. So we have 11 of those blocks from the day we start vet school until the day we go to clinics. And the 11th block, the last block of our didactics, is actually in August, September of our third year. So in reality, we hit clinics in the middle of our fall semester of the third year. So just the beginning.
Interesting. Yeah, I had no idea that the curriculum there was so different.
Hmm.
Okay, but before we go into more details about your experiences in vet school, I'm really fascinated by your past. So originally, you thought you were going to go to human medical school, and
Right.
then decided instead to just pursue a Bachelor of Music degree. So what happened, and what changed your mind?
Well, this story could take hours and hours, so I'll try to keep it short. So I grew up in the medical field in a different kind of way. I actually grew up in the pharmacy business. My grandfather is a pharmacist. My uncle's a pharmacist. And my dad entered into the family business. He's a CPA, but purchased another pharmacy in our family business and pretty much worked there all my entire childhood. So that's where I grew up and learned that business. And I really liked the medical side of kind of helping people, even though I was a teenager, like, oh, this is what you can take for your cold. And here's some over the counter medicines that I was familiar with. So I always had that special tie to medicine, but I didn't really know where it laid. I went to school, again, like you said, at the University of Miami, with the goal of, or the idea of going to medical school, but I really loved music. And that's part of the reason why I went down to Miami, did a great music program. That was really one of my big passions. And I want to do them both. But as you know, and as all the medical professionals out there know, the pre-medical curriculum is just jam-packed and there's very little time to do anything else. And conversely, the music curriculum, interestingly enough, is also jam-packed, and they cram a lot of stuff in there. So I was a bit overwhelmed, and I was doing a bunch of extracurriculars. I was in the marching band and doing fraternity things, and it was just a lot of stuff to juggle. And I was kind of conflicted on what I wanted to do with my life. So I went to the Career Counseling Center and did all of their career aptitude testing and where do your interests lay and what's your destiny kind of thing. And to no avail, I fell right down the middle between music, business, and medicine and sciences. So it's like, well, that's not much help. So what am I going to do? Um, a bunch of my close friends in college were in this program through the music school that was music business. And it was more or less a business degree, but with a twist in the music industry. So in addition to getting the marketing background, the business administration, all of your typical core business curriculum, we also took classes like copyright and record management and record company business skills and things like that. So I got that kind of bit of a twist with my business degree, and that's what I stuck with, and I loved it. And it really invigorated me, and I thought that that's what my passion was. So stuck with it, graduated with that degree, moved back home to St. Louis, and worked for a small production company that did events, concerts, and leadership conferences around the country, and really loved it. And was successful. And about 4 years after I started working there, 4 years after I graduated from college, I was looking for my next move forward. I was kind of hitting my growth ceiling in that company, looking for that next step. And at the time I believe I was dating my wife. I don't think we were engaged yet. And we were kind of talking. And remember, we were kind of on vacation and we were sitting on this dock by this lake. And I was like, well, I really love business. And I still really like medicine. And something kept tying me back to it. And at the time, and kind of the whole impetus of making this change and going back to school was that my childhood dog, a golden retriever, had just passed away. And I was not living with them at the time. I was on my own, again, working after college, but was there and witnessed his end of life care with him, my parents, and the veterinarian. And when the dog passed away, something just kind of clicked in my head that, wow, there's a special bond here. I didn't really realize that people have, especially myself, and the veterinarian really plays a role in that. So I kind of looked into that further and realized that being a veterinarian, of course, you get the medicine side, but you can also do a lot of business with it too. I think veterinarians, unlike a lot of medical doctors, at least in this modern era of medicine, which could give anyone a headache if you get into the nitty-gritty details of it, we can do a lot more business management and own our own practices and have a lot more freedom than medical doctors do now, probably mainly because of the insurance and just politics and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I put those two together. the medicine, the business, and then my love for animals, which I had for forever, obviously, but never really put two and two together. And I realized, well, veterinary medicine ties all of those together, and it seemed perfect. So I kind of took this leap of faith, quit my job, went back to school for a year and a half to do the pre-med prerequisites again, and applied to vet schools. Got in luckily, and here I am.
Oh, fantastic. So you only had a year and a half that you had to do to get in all of your medical prerequisites to apply for vet
Right.
school?
So yeah, it was a bit
Okay.
crazy. I did go through the summer, but luckily I only had to take the sciences again, the core sciences. So from general biology, chemistry, organic chemistry, and physics and biochem. And I was able to do all of that. Luckily, with my undergraduate degree, I had more than enough electives and business classes and things to kind of supplement the application that way. Luckily, too, my grades in undergrad were not near where they should be, at least in my opinion, to get into vet school. So luckily I had the opportunity to kind of redo those science classes, or the ones that I had done in undergrad, and get some decent grades to put on the application.
Yeah, you must have really had your nose to the grindstone for
Yep.
that year and a half.
Yep. Yep.
How
It
many
was
vet
challenging, but
schools? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
no, it paid off. It was a grind, but it paid off.
Right. And how many schools did you apply to?
I actually applied to 10, and
Oh,
I
wow.
think, yeah, that's probably a lot more than average, but keeping in mind that I was, let's see, about 25 when I went back to undergrad, and 25, 26 when I applied. I knew I was a bit behind the eight ball in terms of my timing, even though in the grand scheme of things, those few years off is not going to make that much of a difference. But I felt like I was in a bit of a rush, and kind of wanted to throw my net as far as I possibly could, and apply as many places that I was eligible based on the prereq requirements. So I applied to 10, including St. George's in the Caribbean. And I don't think I applied to any other international schools, but a lot of Midwest schools I applied to. And luckily, I even had a couple choices of where to go. And Mizzou was close to home. I'm from St. Louis, like I said before, and that's our in-state school. So not
Right.
only was the tuition benefit quite
Right.
enticing, but the 2 and 2 year didactic versus clinical curriculum really kind of sold it for me.
Hmm. And so you were with, she was either she was your fiance when you
She's
started
gonna kill me for not remembering this, but she was either my
that?
fiance or my girlfriend when I decided to go back to school, and then we got married the summer before I started vet school.
Okay.
Yeah.
So was she helping you out? I mean, how did you balance like being in a relationship with somebody who also had her own professional career while you were, trying to get into vet school and all that? Because I was single at the time, and I don't know how how
Right.
people can balance all of those things together and not leave their partner feeling completely neglected.
Right. I think the good part about it is that we met after I graduated college. So she knew me already as a working professional, and she knew kind of my work ethic, and how many hours I love to spend working, even when I was in the music business. So she knew the time commitment that was involved, and since we were kind of both in this together, and she was by my side, she kind of knew what was involved. I think it also helped too that ironically she had worked. So she graduated from college in 2011. I graduated in 2009, and she worked for a couple of years in the nonprofit industry. And then actually decided to go back to grad school as well. So we were in school together. She was in a graduate program. I was in an undergraduate program. So we were kind of on the same lines, if you will, in terms of how much time we needed to devote to school.
Hmm. Well, it takes an extra level of commitment, I think, to maintain, a relationship and, do everything that you need to do in order to get into vet school and then to be
Right.
into vet school.
Right.
Since you started veterinary school, has it been more difficult, or is it about the same to, nurture your relationship and still take care of all of your academic responsibilities?
It's a good question. It's different. I wouldn't say it's any more challenging than it was beforehand. I think what we've had to work on is our communication in terms of I've got a huge test this week, or I've got 5 huge tests this week.
Yeah.
Here's the expectations of how much time I'm going to be home. But what we did, which I think was really good, at least in the didactic portion of the curriculum, is that we made a plan that we would have dinner most, if not every night together. So even if that meant I had to come home for dinner and then go back to the library or what have you, we would do that just to make sure we got to see each other every day.
Mm.
I would be lying if I said there weren't challenges along the way where I may not be home until midnight because I was studying, or if I was going out to do something that I would do extracurricular, like I played hockey, or I still play hockey, so I would be going out to play a game at 10 o'clock at night. So I may not be home when she goes to bed. So it's just kind of an importance of, like I said, that communication and setting expectations so that we're both on the same page in terms of what my schedule is like, what her schedule is like, and to make sure that we both get what we need from each other.
Hmm. Do you think that it's been difficult for her?
I think so. She is definitely more of the, and this may be a total generalization, so I apologize, but I feel like generally, um, many females in relationships need more of the consistent and regular person-to-person contact.
Hmm.
I'm being careful with what I say here, but
That's
I
funny.
I think
Yes.
again in general, male, since one of our big faults is that we compartmentalize a lot and we can only think about one thing at one time. When I'm kind of in the grind and I'm working really, really hard, I'm focused and I'm able to compartmentalize that. Whereas sometimes she was not able to see that side of me. So there was some understanding hurdles to get over in terms of, how can I be working so hard and not care about coming home. Well, it's not that I didn't care about coming home. I was just so focused, I kind of lost track of what I was doing.
Mhm.
Um, so that,
That's funny. And I don't think you have to worry. Well, I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for all women out there, but I'm not offended by what you say. In fact, I agree with it.
yeah, I mean, everyone's different, of course. And I think that would be actually maybe less accurate in our industry. And maybe you can say something to that too, because I know that being in veterinary school and being a veterinarian, you have to be very driven. You have to be very, devoted to your work and to the career. So I would imagine that a lot of the women in our industry, since we're getting to the point, if not already, that more than half of our working veterinarians are women, and certainly the vast majority of veterinary students are women, that may be different. And I do have many close friends in veterinary school that are women and kind of have the same mindset that I do, that are very, very driven and can compartmentalize their studies from social life, and it goes back to that whole challenge of a work-life balance, which again we could probably speak hours and hours on, but yeah, relationship dynamics I think are going to be a challenge in any profession,
Mhm.
and it certainly can be one in veterinary medicine, at least from what I've learned in my few years of being married.
Right, right. And so before I went to vet school and before I became a veterinarian and was practicing, I didn't have any idea about how all-consuming a career
Mhm.
in medical practice can be, whether you're a human medical doctor or a veterinary medical doctor. And now that I know that, it's much easier for me to understand it when I see somebody else working in the career.
Right.
But I think, gosh, it can be really easy to interpret that drive and seeing your partner work so hard and so many hours as thinking that, oh, that they love their career more than me.
Right.
But that really is what it takes. So
Right.
uh, yeah.
And it's
Do you
not that
think?
we may love the career more than your spouse or your significant other. It's just you love it in a different way, and it's about finding that balance. And I'm still trying to find that balance, and I
Right.
probably will continue to try to find that for years to come. But I think that's one of the great things about our career is that it is so, in my opinion, so fun and so invigorating, and it really is what drives me every day. Even though school can be uh, completely difficult and just not fun at sometimes, it's still in some way this miserable type of fun. So
That's exactly how I felt.
right,
There was a miserable type of fun,
right. Why
absolutely.
am I doing this? It's so fun, but it hurts so bad.
I felt every day in veterinary school, I learned something that was just so amazing that just blew my mind. I said,
Mhm.
wow, at least once a day,
Right.
every day throughout veterinary school.
Yep.
Hmm. Now, do you think that your your experience, your professional experience in event production, do you think that that helped you in your application to veterinary school?
In the application, certainly, I think it was a great way to set myself apart from the other applicants. I
Mhm,
do think that since I'm, I guess by definition would be a non-traditional student, just being a second career, being an older individual, that in itself set me apart. But having that different educational background, I think also did. But I think most importantly, actually, it's something that I really try to advocate to prospective students is having professional experience before vet school really helped me not only to get into vet school, but most importantly to succeed in vet school because the skills that I learned in my first career, things like management and just management amongst the team, time management, um, making to-do lists, which sounds just so trivial and stupid.
mhm,
Things like that, just how to work was not something I learned in undergrad.
mhm,
And had I not done that, I think vet school would have been monumentally more difficult for me.
mm, mm,
Um, so that is probably what I'm most thankful for. Is that experience helped me look at vet school through a different lens, if you will. Um, and I know that since most of the veterinary students are coming right out of undergraduate, they don't have that opportunity to have a career before vet school. But if there's a way to get any type of professional experience, whether that's an internship, a summer job, even something to get out into the real world and see how it works and to juggle tasks. Not saying that juggling your curriculum in undergraduate is not a real task. It's just different, and I don't know how to explain it. Um, but it is definitely something that I don't take for granted now, having worked before vet school and now going through it.
mhm. And when you first began veterinary school, what what were your perceptions when you first started?
It's hard to remember. I know that I was scared, probably scared out of my mind, but I really tried to stick with kind of how I knew to juggle all those things. Like I said, keeping to-do lists and staying as organized as I could, using technology to my advantage with notes and using electronic flashcards instead of writing everything out. Just ways to be more efficient. I think when I first started, I was so excited that the fright kind of took a back seat, and luckily at Mizzou we have such a great community amongst our own class and amongst our upperclassmen, that we had a lot of support coming in that way. Also from our professors too, of course. But I remember the excitement, I think mainly with anatomy, and then after that first anatomy test was more fright because I realized how difficult this was going to be. But it's kind of a surreal feeling. I remember that you work so hard, the last few years, and for a lot of people work so hard their entire life to get to that point. Now they're there and they're actually doing it. Um, and then that excitement kind of kept going on in waves, of course, just because you would have these really difficult tests and these classes that you weren't so keen on, or a professor you did not seem to jive with. But the excitement kind of renewed itself when we got to second year. We were doing more medicine courses and learning surgery and things like that. And as the days went by, the career became more real. You could see the light at the end of the tunnel and actually see yourself doing these things and how great it was going to be. And now that I'm in clinics, actually getting to use these things, um, just kind of puts the icing on the cake.
Mhm, mhm, yeah. I wonder if I remember just feeling like, "Oh, well, I'm gonna work so hard that I'm gonna get into vet school, and then I'll be able to relax a little bit
Right.
because I'll already be in vet school."
Right.
And, just the sheer volume of information that we were responsible for. It's nothing like undergraduate. I mean, undergraduate, organic chemistry, biochemistry, all
Right.
that stuff was difficult, but, you have, instead of having 2 lectures or 3 lectures a day as an undergraduate student, challenging courses,
Right.
you have, you're literally in that seat in lecture hall from what, 8 in the morning till 5 at night or
Right.
6 at night.
Right.
And,
And I
every
think too, with undergraduate, you're so focused on taking those classes because you need to get the grade to get into vet school. And
Mhm,
it's different because in vet school, at least from what I found and what I've tried to focus on, is that grades don't really matter as much as they did in undergraduate. They matter, of course, but instead of learning the material to get the grade, you're learning the material to be a good veterinarian. So
Hmm.
the things that you're learning in vet school actually matter out in the real world. The things that I learned in organic chemistry or general chemistry, yeah, they're important. And I don't mean to knock our chemist friends out there, but I don't really use a lot of that stuff nowadays,
Hmm.
if anything. The things I'm learning in veterinary school, I'm using that almost every day.
Hmm.
So it's a different mindset, I think, in terms of why you're there, why you're learning, and being able to apply the different concepts you're learning in school.
Hmm. You know, I'm really interested to hear, and I don't even know if you'll be able to tell me the answer to this because it's just so subjective. But when I first started veterinary school, I remember thinking, okay, now I'm going to learn how to be a doctor.
Right.
And the first couple of years, it was the preclinical. They
Hmm.
were preclinical science courses. So we had medical biochemistry and anatomy, and as clinically relevant as anatomy turns out to be, the way in which it's taught is not necessarily from a clinical perspective.
Right.
At least our anatomy course was taught by anatomists.
Right.
So
Sure. Same.
these aren't necessarily people who practice medicine. So I mean, do you have that feeling at all? Like I remember thinking like, when is this going to feel like I'm learning to be a doctor? Because right now it just feels like it's more of the same stuff in undergraduate, except just lots and lots more.
Right. It's a good question, and I don't know if I have a answer, but I've had thoughts on that because I've thought about that a lot. And one wish that I had for at least Mizzou, and I wish I had for most vet schools, is to rethink and relook at the way that these what we call the basic sciences in vet school are taught. Um, I've found that our medicine courses that were taught to us second year, most of them were taught by clinicians.
Hmm.
The way we were taught is vastly different than the way we were taught by our anatomists or our physiologists, professors that have been in academia to teach lectures and to do their research and all those great things that they do. But it's difficult. It was difficult for me to internalize a lot of the concepts that we learned then in relation to the concepts that we were learning in our medicine courses because of the way they were taught. I
Hmm.
don't know what the right answer is. I know that there is a better way to do it. There's always a better way to do everything, I think. Um, and I actually coincidentally read something, I think on Facebook the other day, that some veterinarian was looking back at the way they learn anatomy. And they said that they had wished they had learned anatomy through the eyes of a surgeon rather than
That's funny. That's
through the
mine.
eye,
I
right,
wrote
through the
that.
eyes of a anatomist.
Yeah.
Um, because with anatomy, there's just so much. Remember, I don't remember. I feel like I don't remember a whole. I know a lot. I know I remember more than I think I do. But um, it's almost like I wish we had done some clinical work before, so that we could go back and like, oh, I remember that structure because this is the procedure it was um, important in, or this is the function that it had, rather than just memorizing these hundreds and hundreds of structures every week to then regurgitate it on an exam.
Hmm.
Um, I know that a lot of schools or some schools now are going more towards the problem-based learning
Right.
way of teaching.
Right.
And the classes that we did that in, I'm thinking back to probably one of the best taught courses at Mizzou, at least that I've had, was our clinical pathology course, where we were just looking at blood work all day and looking at these different labs, and the way that was taught, going through actual cases and applying the things that they were teaching us to these cases, it made so much sense,
Hmm.
rather than just looking off outlines on a PowerPoint or looking at diagrams of an anatomy picture or something like that. So I feel like if we can connect cases to what we're learning and do more problem-based learning and casework, kind of like I said, if there's a way to get us clinical experience before we're ready for clinical experience, I feel like it would help. I just don't know how we're going to get there, but I feel like I'm learning now that I've been in clinics for just a few months. Um, I feel like I'm learning so much more. Things are sticking so much better now that I have a case to work it up on, and physical aspects of the concepts that tie it to, if that
Hmm.
makes any sense.
Right. So it's like everything is becoming more interconnected in your brain, and you're kind
Right.
of now you're able to see the bigger picture, and how the information from all these disparate subjects can be linked together to be clinically relevant.
Right. Right.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's a challenge, and I know that in human medicine they struggle with the same thing.
Hmm.
I'm sure it makes us smarter, but how to apply that clinically, I don't know, because as you said, these courses are taught by people who are not clinicians. So,
Right. And I think
mhm,
probably what I think a lot of that where I think where a lot of that's going to come back into play is I'll be in clinics, I'll be with a patient, and there'll be something that comes up in conversation that's like, oh, we learned about that in physiology in our first semester. I don't remember what it was, but I know where to look. And then I'll go back
right,
to my notes and I'll find the textbook that it was in, and I'll reread it, and it'll come back to me kind of like riding a bike. So maybe, hopefully, that's where things are going to come back in.
right.
And I've heard of that a lot in veterinary school. It's that they don't expect you to remember every single word that you were taught throughout the curriculum, but at
Mhm.
least you know the resources and you can understand once you get back there what that was all about.
Yeah. And it's really interesting how you say you wish you could have had some clinical experience first before the didactic learning.
Hmm.
And I often wish that I could, now that I know what I know, I could go back and take some of those
Right.
classes again, and then I would get so much more out of it. And I actually kept my notes from veterinary school, um, with the express purpose of rereading them after
Hmm.
I'd practiced for several years. And I'm sorry to say, like pharmacology, I went
Right.
back, I'm like, "Oh, now I'm gonna reread my pharmacology notes, and I'm gonna understand so much more of how it's clinically relevant." But no,
Yep.
sorry.
Yep. That's okay. I figured.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah. I
that's
always thought that now that I've gone through, junior surgery training and um, some different surgeries in our clinics, if I were to take anatomy again, not that I would ever wish that on anybody to do that
oh
a
god.
second time,
Right.
I would do so much better because I understand a lot more than I did back when I
Yes.
was a freshman vet student.
Yes, yes. It is amazing the changes that take place in your brain as you go through,
Right.
veterinary school. So, okay, now you are I understand this, because I've listened to your podcast. So I have the idea that you have the intention of starting your own business after you graduate from veterinary. So you
Correct.
want to start your own practice.
Well, the debate is still out whether or not I want to start a practice from the ground up or if I want to buy into a practice. I think it's going to be more of a game time decision once I go back home to St. Louis. At least that's the plan. Um, but yeah, the wheels are definitely turning in terms of how I want to do that. Like I said before, business is one of my passions, and that's one of the big reasons I wanted to get into veterinary medicine. So that is definitely a goal of mine to happen sooner rather than later after I graduate. I think the 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 $1 million question now is how soon can that happen? I think based on my experience before vet school and my business acumen, if you will, now I could probably run or start run a veterinary practice adequately well now. It's just a matter of the medicine that is definitely not where it needs to be. So I think that's going to be the limiting factor in terms of when I graduate. How fast can I get comfortable in my medicine skills
Hmm.
that I can either operate on my own or lead another team of veterinarians, so that I feel comfortable with medicine along with running the business.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I think so. Most of the veterinarians that I talk to, they feel like it was a good 4 to 5 years
Hmm.
before they felt comfortable as clinicians.
Right.
But, of course, there's a huge amount of variability in terms of your personality, and how much, yeah, how comfortable are you at having to balance 2 different learning curves at the same time?
Right. Right. I
Yeah.
think ideally, at least kind of the the perfect scenario that I could see happening right now is that I could work under somebody for a year or two and then buy into a practice that has a mentor available,
Mhm.
that I could work with. So I would be mentored by another veterinarian at the practice, but then own and run the business side of it, so that I would have some type of sounding board and some more learning experience. That would probably be a unique and maybe weird scenario to have. Um, but that mentorship is definitely something I'm looking forward to having, and something that I definitely want to make sure I have once I'm out of veterinary school, because I think that's one of the really good ways to learn and hone those skills when you're out of school. So how it's going to actually go down, I'm not exactly sure. Um, but like I said, I'd like to be on the fast track to get into the business side of things. Um, but but getting comfortable with the medicine is definitely going to be that thing that's going to determine that schedule. So I don't know how it's going to happen, but it'll happen.
Hmm. Have you given any thought to maybe doing an internship, or you just want to jump right in, get started, and start making reasonable money versus
Right.
internship money?
I've gone back and forth. I've heard both sides of or seen both sides of the coin here with friends that have graduated recently that are in internship programs and those that are not. So I know that being in like a rotating internship uh, program could get me that experience quickly, and maybe a little too quickly from what I've heard from my friends that are interns now. But I feel like if you also have a good intern, or excuse me, a good mentor at a practice that sees a lot of different cases or sees a lot of cases that you want to be doing throughout your career, that could also accomplish the same goal. So I think it's going to be seeing what type of opportunities are out there over the next year, since time is now running out. I'm graduating a year and a half. So, so I'm not too sure. The financial aspect of being an intern is somewhat concerning, but like I said, it's a year out of a hopefully decades long career. So it won't make that huge of a difference. It may hurt at the time, but definitely something that I'm going to think about pretty strongly as we get a little bit closer to graduation, start talking to some more people out in the industry.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't expect you to know, be able to answer all of my questions. It's just so interesting to talk to somebody that, is going through the same things that I went through years
Right.
ago, and sometimes I forget, that you haven't made all those decisions yet.
Right.
So,
Now, interestingly, too, and I'm not sure if you've heard of this around where you live or any of your classmates that you went to school with, but I've heard of a few people from Mizzou and a few people from other schools that have actually graduated and then gone out right into buying a practice. So they did not spend any time off as an associate. I believe that they did have some other veterinarians at the practices that they bought into, but I think that's becoming a little more commonplace than it was, um, within the last several years, that new graduates are actually going out into ownership without having those few years of experience beforehand. Have you heard of anyone doing that?
I heard of one person that did that.
Hmm.
Yeah, and turned out quite well for her, but
Right.
I don't know if that's. Do you know how they feel about that experience? Did it? I
I,
mean,
I, I don't really know. I would imagine that it's probably a little bit more stressful than it would be having gone the slower route. But I think if there's an opportunity and if you're comfortable with it, you might as well take it. I think there's always going to be a support system out there if you aren't comfortable with either the medicine side or the business side, that you'll be able to make it through. It's just going to be how well do you cope with that learning curve, like you said, and how much of that stress, even though it can be good stress, can you take, and are your expectations in line with what it's going to take, and how tough it may be in those first couple years out.
yeah. I would really like to see more new veterinarians start their own practices
Hmm.
or become practice owners, via whatever route, because I think that that is ultimately going to be the answer to being able to pay off their loans in a
Sure.
reasonable amount of time.
Sure.
But I think that one of the difficulties is because, as we were touching on earlier, women, men, we see things differently, we
Right.
do things differently, and women who are very, very driven professionally, they can achieve incredible things, just like men can,
Right.
practice ownership, clinical competence, etc. However, they don't compartmentalize as well as men do. So for
Right.
them, the relationship is just an interconnected part of their lives, and so I think women get pulled in more directions than men tend to. So I think that's that's the challenge with why fewer veterinarians are actually buying practices and becoming owners now, because it does demand just so very much.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that's actually one of my big questions that I ask most veterinarians that I meet, is that why are we seeing that? Why are we seeing veterinarians reluctant to go into the business side of things?
Mhm.
Um, why do we see that the huge gender um, disproportion now in veterinary schools? Is there something about veterinary medicine that really attracts women, or that really does not attract men? What is that? Um, where are we going in terms of practice setup? Are we going to see corporate practices take over the industry?
Mhm.
If are we going to see them take it over if associates and private practitioners do not continue to own their own practices?
Mhm.
There's just a lot of things that are changing in the industry that I'm very interested about, and I have no idea what the answer is. I don't think really anyone knows what's going on in terms of those few aspects, but um, definitely exciting times coming up. I
Yeah.
think the unknown can be scary.
Absolutely, and, but it's also very fascinating, the changes that are taking place, and,
Mhm.
I think that, if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, as you seem to do, I think that you can take advantage of, some of the opportunities out there, because you're thinking outside of the box, and you're looking at different sorts of business models, and, you're thinking creatively about it.
Yeah, and yeah, that kind of gets me going. That gets my juices flowing, just thinking about that new stuff. And I think it's from, again, my limited time in this industry, or learning about the industry, is that I think it looks to be a great time to be a veterinarian, because we're just seeing, and kind of going back to the human animal bond aspect of really why I wanted to get into vet med, is that that is becoming so much more strong every day, that I think the role of the veterinarian has the opportunity to play a huge role in people's lives. We're seeing people spend, at least in this country, billions of dollars on Halloween costumes for their dogs and cats.
Right.
Um, Unfortunately, a very small fraction of that is going toward their medical care, but I think that's because we have not found a way to tap into that.
Mhm.
Um, you know, new parents that have uh, young children, or their first child, they will do whatever they can to make sure that that child is happy and healthy. Um, and more you hear people talking about their pets as their children.
Mhm.
So there's definitely, I think, a connection to be made there, and I think a big opportunity for us to be more involved in these animals' lives. And I'm obviously speaking more towards the companion animals, but um, uh, again, like I said, tons of opportunity out there, and I think it's just going to be who's going to be able to crack that question and make a big difference and kind of change the industry, to keep going where it's going.
Mhm, mhm. Well, I think part of the problem is that, there have been so many changes, and there continue to be so many changes, and these changes are happening very quickly. I mean, if you think about veterinary medicine 30 years ago versus now,
Right.
it's a completely different universe. And in some ways, I feel like when we graduate from veterinary school, we're being prepared to practice veterinary medicine in a world that no longer exists.
Sure.
So things are, societally, so many changes have taken place. Like you said, the human animal bond,
Hmm.
that's much different than it used to be. I mean, even
Right.
when I was growing up, I remember, like, I would judge my parents very harshly,
Right.
for how they took care of my dogs when I was a kid.
Right.
But when I was a kid, and that things were different, and
Sure. And I
so yeah.
think too, I always think of veterinary medicine as being a decade behind the human medical side, both in terms of kind of the way we're taught in school, the technology we have at our disposal. But I think that since we're always moving forward in our technology and the way we care for these animals, I always think back to, like, talking to my grandfather, who's almost 90 years old, and telling him that we're doing MRIs and CTs on our dogs. It sounds ridiculous, right? I mean, when he was a kid, dogs didn't even come inside.
Yeah, right.
So I mean, it's just amazing the things that we are able to do for our animals, and the things that people will do for their animals, like getting a $1,000 MR scan of their dog. So like I said, the opportunities out there are incredible in terms of the medical care that we're able to provide. And people are willing to spend the money to do it. A big question that I have that I think may not be a discussion for now because it would just take way too long is how is insurance going to play a role? And because as this technology becomes more and more commonplace in the industry, the cost isn't going to go down for that. It's not going to go down significantly for that, those diagnostics and the technology and the treatments that we have available. So something's going to have to give, I think, eventually, because we're not going to be able to shell out all the money that we need to do the medical care that we're trained to do. So that I know that I kind of got off topic there for a second, but
No,
just
not at
another
all.
thought,
It's a good
how
point.
things are going to change a little bit because we are getting so advanced in our medicine that things are going to change.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you brought that up. It's very relevant. And there are people in the veterinary medicine world who are strenuously arguing in favor of and advocating for trying to increase the number of pet owners that have pet insurance, because that's going to make all the difference. It's going to make a difference in the lives of pet owners, in the lives of their pets, and also in the lives of veterinarians, because
Sure.
we want to be able to do the best that we can for our patients. And it can be very hard on us psychologically and emotionally to not be able to do that for financial reasons.
Right.
So it's just a matter of, I guess, normalizing the idea that pet owners should have pet insurance. That being said, I do not have pet insurance.
Right. Nope, me
But
neither.
I have credit cards. I have a credit card that is dedicated specifically to my pets. So
Right.
if something happens, I will
You'll
pay
be
it
okay
off.
for that. Right.
Yeah, slowly over time.
Right.
So why did you decide, what was the thinking that went into starting your own podcast when you were a second year student? And I have to say, I don't know if this is true at your veterinary school, but I suspect it must be based on what you've told me. Second year veterinary school across the board seems to be the most difficult, the most labor intensive year of all 4 years. So how could you and why did you decide to do that in your second year of veterinary school?
So the first interesting thing is that, like you said, typically the second year of veterinary school is usually the most challenging. And I think that's, at least from what I've heard from other students at other schools, that's the case at most other schools. Now, Mizzou, of course, we have to be different in some way. For us, the general consensus is the first year is the most difficult. Whether or not that seems to be the case because it's second year, we've just gotten used to it. It doesn't seem as difficult, but it definitely seems that first year is the most grinding. And I think that's due to the accelerated pace that we go in terms of those first year general science courses. And I will also say to that, and I'm not sure what the policies are at other schools, but we have a generally, at least in my opinion, a stringent policy in terms of grades that a grade standard that we need to keep in the didactic curriculum in terms of how many D's you can get. We're only allowed a certain number of D credits. And then after that, you are you are able to come back to the school, invited back. You can apply again, but then again, you have to go through that the entire process. So I think we have a bit more of a stringent grading policy in terms of that, and that may be why first year is so difficult. The reason I mention that is because of the small handful of students that generally each class loses due to that grading requirement. The vast majority of that happens in the first year. Let alone actually the first fall semester. Is I got into listening to podcasts probably 6 or 9 months before I actually started my own, and really thought that it was a really cool medium and a really good way to unwind and kind of get this entertainment thing into my life. And it was a really cool way to go about doing it. luckily for me, I had some basic audio training in my previous career and also in my schooling. I play an instrument, part of my music degree, so I knew basically the way that the technology worked and how to record audio, how to produce it well. And I started looking into some veterinary podcasts and trying to find anything I could on any topic veterinary medicine related. And there were several out there, and I found that um, the production quality was not up to the standard that I had heard, at least in schooling and in my previous career. So I knew there was an opportunity to kind of take the quality of the podcast to a new level. But most importantly, I was looking for a podcast that was about veterinary school, and I could not find one to save my life. So I was like, well, I need a hobby. Not sure if I have time, but it could be a hobby. So I looked into it. Talked to actually a cousin who works for NPR, does his own podcasting, and kind of just talked about his experience with it and what's involved. And I had all the equipment again from growing up and just accumulating different gear over the years, so I didn't really have to make that much of an investment. And I just thought that this could be a really cool idea, and to have people on to talk about topics that were relevant to veterinary students, also to prospective students, to new graduates, and just kind of went for it and to see where it went. I had to, like we had talked about before, set up a website and figure all the hosting things that where you had to put the audio files and all the headaches that was not much fun of part of the process, but alas, we did it, and here I am now. So it's been pretty well received, and I think that the vet students that listen do get something out of it. I try to find some really good guests that have really good insight, because obviously I don't have much of a expert insight on these topics since I'm only a vet student, but having people come on to talk about wellness or business or study habits, insurance, things like that, things that can supplement our learning in vet school, I think can be really, really good to hear, and a good kind of, like I said, supplement to the curriculum, and a fun way to learn about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I've listened to your podcast and I enjoy it very much.
Thank you.
You've had what is your 20th episode? Is that the latest one?
I actually yesterday just released the 24th. So
24th.
Yeah.
Nice. And do you do it every week, or do you have a set schedule at all? Can you have a set schedule?
My goal was to do it every 2 weeks. In November, December, I actually went about 5 weeks, and I felt really bad about it. So I put out two in the last week, I did two in the last 2 weeks. I did one every week, just to try to get caught back up. But I try to have at least one guest lined up at the time I'm doing one, so that I have something to do. And that's part of the reason why I fell a little bit behind, because of being new at clinics and just having a bit of a different schedule, trying to figure all that out and not have a guest to pick their brain about. But yeah, every 2 weeks is my goal. I think that's having consistency with these podcasts is a good thing, just to keep it on people's minds, to know that every couple of weeks I'm going to have something new coming out. Yeah, it's kind of unpredictable, as I know and other veterinarians and vet students out there know with scheduling, but it's something fun to do and something to look forward to that's not school related.
Right. I love it, the idea that you did it because you needed a hobby. But it was it's a hobby where you get to learn and you help other people learn about non-academic
Right.
topics. Or if it is academic, it's about maybe how to excel at academics.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's a great resource. So
and talking about tough topics too that we don't talk about a lot in vet school. I think wellness is one of those that obviously there's a lot of talk about it nowadays, but not a whole lot talked about openly in school. So I wanted to provide a platform for just some of those harder topics that we don't talk much about.
Yeah, let me ask you about that. When you made the decision that you wanted to go to veterinary school, did you know about some of the tough issues that are facing new veterinarians?
I actually didn't. I had no idea, and I quickly got the picture, and I knew that it was happening within weeks of being in vet school, because it was such a vibrant topic of conversation. And I'm glad that people have become more open to talking about it, because it's definitely an issue. I don't think not only in the veterinary profession, I think in many other professions that there's been a stigma about talking about personal wellness and anxiety and depression and things that come along with our line of work,
Mhm.
that people have just been either scared to talk about, or they were trying to protect their ego or their pride, which is of course very natural, but it's only seemed to get a lot of us in trouble. And the more we bottle up and not talk about it, the more trouble we get into. It's kind of a spiraling effect, and this kind of builds upon itself. So it's definitely something I think we can overcome, but I think we just have to start talking about it a lot more. And I know a lot of people, yourself included, and what I try to do on my own podcast and other speakers around the country have just been to open up about it and show that it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to have those feelings, because we're only human after all. And as great as our profession is, there are a lot of things that uh, set us up to have those types of conflicts in ourselves.
Mhm. It's interesting. I mean, when I didn't know anything about it, and then in veterinary school, I didn't know anything about it. So
Hmm.
I started in veterinary school in 2007,
Hmm.
and I didn't know anything about it at
Right.
all.
Right.
So when I graduated and I started having some emotional and psychological challenges of my own that come along with practicing medicine, but veterinary medicine, human medicine, the standards are very high, the stakes are high.
Right.
You know, you don't get into and through medical school by being a slacker.
Right.
And so, we always want to be the best and do the best we can. We're perfectionists. So I came up against that like a brick wall, and I
Yep.
had no idea. And I thought it was just me. So I think one of the advantages that students coming into the profession after me, yourself included, is that you guys actually know that these problems exist. So you won't feel like, oh, it's just you.
Right.
That was part of the problem, I think, is we all just thought it was just us,
Right.
which, now we know it isn't. So I think hopefully more of us will feel comfortable about talking about it. Like, hey,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a
And
human being.
I think one of the other the reasons why it's become so prevalent is that, at least in kind of a theory I have, is that a lot of students these days and a lot of new veterinarians haven't, luckily for them, had many uh, hardships like veterinary school, or like things they experience in the veterinary world, until they get to veterinary school. A lot of us have been very driven, high achieving. They may not have had a whole lot of struggle in college or high school. And that first struggle comes in veterinary school. They don't know what to do with it. They think it's, oh my gosh, now this is when I'm going to start to have some difficulty. Well, I must not be worthy. And then you get imposter syndrome, and it gets out of control. So I think if we can address it, like you said, before veterinary school, or during orientation, that, listen, some of you may not have ever had hardships like this before. Some of you may have, but chances are something's going to come up in veterinary school, or at least in your career, that are going to be challenging for you. And it's normal, and it's okay. And here are resources and a
Hmm.
support system to help
Hmm.
you out, because most of us go through it, and it's perfectly normal and healthy and natural.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and I should correct myself, because I don't want to give the impression that my school was behind or not talking about things that they should have been. They did tell us about imposter syndrome. So that
Hmm.
was, one of the issues, and I think that a lot of people, when they first get into veterinary school, that's when it happens.
Right.
Because now you're used to being the best in your class,
Right.
an undergraduate, or at the top of the class, and then you get to veterinary school, and yeah, lo and behold, you're surrounded by people
Right.
who are as smart or smarter than you, and yeah, yeah,
Right.
it's
And one of the things that I found was, and going back to anatomy, and if any prospective students are listening, or students that haven't gone through anatomy yet, I don't mean to sound like anatomy is like hell on earth, but certainly a challenge. But definitely, if I can get through it, you can get through it. Anyways, um, classes like that, where you would study so hard, and harder than you've ever studied before in your life, and you're still doing not as well as you thought you would do. Um, I think that's when it hit me. It was like, my gosh, what am I doing that I'm not doing? Like, I'm trying as hard as I possibly can, and it's still not working the way I think it should be. But um, everyone's going through it, and as long as you get through it, you're good. I mean, they would not pass you unless they didn't think you were worthy or prepared or qualified to be a veterinarian. So don't let the grades and the academic hardships get you down because everyone's going through it. And these professors and the faculty members at these schools and veterinarians out in practice, your bosses or your associates, they know what you're going through, and we've all been there. We're all going through it now. So yeah.
Yeah, open out, reach out, for help. And I
Right.
think like the moment you feel like you're starting to struggle, I think that's when you should reach out.
Right.
Don't hesitate, because the longer you wait, the worse it gets, and the
Absolutely.
worse it gets, the less you feel like reaching out. That's what I would say.
Absolutely.
So getting ready to wrap up. I know you're. I want to give you as much time as possible to enjoy your time off. I know how busy you are, and I really appreciate your time.
This has been great.
Um, but are there any last words of advice that you'd like to offer future veterinary students or people who are in vet school now?
I would say uh, keep your eye on the prize. I know a lot of us get so caught up in the actual nitty gritty work of vet school, getting the good grades and going to class and doing all the stuff you need to do to get through it. But um, if you can visualize yourself out in practice doing what you're going to be doing, whether that's in public health or private practice or in academia, you know, use that to drive you to get through one of the most difficult times in your life. Funny and important story that I heard early in vet school was that for most of us, our entire life or most of our adult life has been working to get to vet school. And that was the goal. The goal was to go to undergraduate or, graduate from high school, get really good grades, go to a really good school, get really good grades, and then go to vet school. And then you go to vet school and you're like, oh, now what? Like that was the goal. You didn't have there wasn't a goal in your forefront about what's going to happen after vet school. So find that goal. You've made it to vet school. Great. Congratulations. Now what's the new goal?
Mm-hmm.
And work towards that. So whether that's a short-term goal or a long-term goal, short-term goal could be let's just make it through anatomy, and then we're gonna figure out a new goal, or let's make it to clinics, and then we're gonna figure out what I want to do after clinics. Or if it's someone like me that's probably weird and knows at least today what I want to do when I get out, that's kind of what's driving me. I go to clinics and I can in a dorky way and imagine myself what it's going to be like out when I'm on my own or working for a practice or having my own practice, and not just thinking about, oh, well, this clinician that just tore me a new one because something I messed up on is not doing it to be mean or because he needs a power trip or she needs a power trip. It's because they're training me to be a really good veterinarian once I'm out. So keep your eye on the prize, figure out really why you want to be a veterinarian and picture yourself doing that. And I think that's going to make veterinary school a lot more bearable and a lot more fun rather than just thinking, oh, I got to go to class today, another round of tests, whoop-de-doo, this is not going to be any fun. But if you realize you're going to take this exam so that you can go to clinics or so that you can graduate and be a veterinarian, it makes it a lot better and a lot more fun.
Okay, wonderful advice. Is there any way that people can get in touch with you or find out more about you?
Absolutely. So I invite anyone out there, like I said, prospective students, veterinary students, and new graduates, even associate seasoned veterinarians. Check out the podcast, Vet School Unleashed. You can find it at vetschoolunleashed.com or on iTunes or wherever you find podcasts. I try to post a lot on Instagram or as much as I can. So my Instagram handle is Seth the Almost Vet. And then email me if you want to reach out to me that way at seth@vetschoolunleashed.com. And we can definitely get in touch.
All right, fantastic. Seth Williams, again, thank you so much for your time. It has been a genuine pleasure meeting you and speaking with you.
Likewise, and great work on your podcast. I'm glad you got that up and running, and another really great resource on the podcast front for veterinarians. And if you're not into podcasts, you should be, because they're a lot of fun and there are a lot of really great veterinary topic ones. There are a lot of veterinary based ones out there, and congrats on yours, and thanks for reaching out to me.
Yeah, thank you. And have a wonderful remainder of your vacation, and good luck with the rest of school.
Thank you very much.